Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Only Stupid Answers. My name is DJ Wooldridge, and we are here today to talk about The Boys, Season 2, Episode 4, titled Nothing Like It in the World. And the synopsis is as follows. Road trip. The boys head to North Carolina to follow a lead on a mysterious soup named Liberty. And did you know a person's choice of candy bars might tell you if they're a serial killer? Watch and learn the warning signs. This episode could save your life. And this episode is directed by Fred Toy and written by Michael Saltzman. All right, as this synopsis suggests, this episode is in fact primarily concerned with a road trip involving the boys and Starlight. And I'd say the boys, but it's mostly just Mother's Milk and Huey because Frenchie is busy getting high and depressed. I guess because he failed Kamiko and Kenji got killed in the last episode. He does try to make a move on Kamiko, which of course doesn't go great. And he goes back to his old flame that we saw in the previous season. And she gives him some like, oh, you're trying to help somebody else, but you're really trying to help yourself, you know, like pseudo-psychology bullshit, that kind of thing. Meanwhile, Kamiko is looking to get revenge on Stormfront because of course she is, because Stormfront murdered Kenji last week. But we're going to get more into Stormfront later. Butcher, on the other hand, is not a part of the road trip because the Colonel gives him a kernel of truth and lets him know where Becca is being held. Like a lot of you mentioned in the comments, Becca did not go to a facility. She is trapped in a facility, and the Colonel lets Butcher know where that is, and he figures out how to get in there. He decides to leave the boys. He makes it sound like for good. He's going to get Becca out and never be seen or heard from again, but this is only episode 4 of the season, and there's a third season, so we know that's not going to work out. But anyway, he's off to go find Becca. Meanwhile, Black Noir is on the lookout for him, and I got to just mention, I think of the 7, Black Noir is my favorite, probably because he doesn't speak, so he doesn't have a lot of opportunity to say like ass things like Homelander does, and they get a lot of dark humor out of his silence. So Butcher finds Becca. They're able to reconnect in more ways than one, and she correctly susses out that while he's trying to save both Becca and Ryan, he's more focused on Becca and will probably look to drop Ryan at the first open opportunity, which makes sense on a variety of levels. Of course, there's the selfish ones in that it's not his kid, it's the kid of his arch enemy, and he's the product of rape, which is not Ryan's fault, but you would understand why Butcher would not be too keen on seeing him around all the time. What he brings up to Becca is actually a more interesting reason in that what everybody's interested in, what Vought is interested in, is Ryan. So he is a liability. He is a liability to their escape, which is actually pretty reasonable considering Butcher. But of course, Becca loves her son and does not want to leave him. And she also correctly points out that if he doesn't have a mother to raise him, then you're just creating another Homelander, and nobody needs that. Homelander is the worst. If you're looking for a theme in these reviews, it's that Homelander is the worst. And so, of course, Becca decides not to go with him because, again, this is episode 4 of the season. But speaking of Homelander, he's continuing to deal with his crisis of conscience, or not really, because he doesn't have a conscience, but he's still dealing with his insecurities after loss of Madeline last season. And that takes a creepy turn because he's found a soup who's able to like make himself look like other people, a la Mystique. And he goes by the name Doppelganger, and he is pretending to be Madeline for the comfort of Homelander, which is great to see Elizabeth Shue again, but it's not healthy because Homelander doesn't do healthy things because, again, he's the worst. And I feel really bad for Doppelganger. He had to know how this was going to end. I mean, we all did, but again, you don't really have a lot of options with Homelander, and he continues to do awful things in this episode. Pointedly, in an interview with Maria Menounos, as they try to do damage control for Vought, he outs Maeve as a lesbian for a variety of reasons. One, to like find an easy out on the fact that they're being called out for the lack of representation within the 7, which is interesting because in a lot of superhero worlds, the universe doesn't have a lot of representation because of the creators behind the scenes. But within this world, there's actually an internal logic in that Vought, the company, is racist. And I think they say like 98% of soups in this world are white. And of course, Homelander brings up A-Train, and that's when he outs Maeve as well, when he realizes that's not going to be enough to like cover his tracks. This of course reveals to Maeve he knows about her girlfriend, which of course is terrifying because the less Homelander knows about you, the better. Still not happy with his place in the 7 and questioning his own ability to lead the team, he goes to confront Stormfront, who's starting to lead Rally. She's really becoming kind of like the superhero equivalent of like a conservative pundit in our world, where she's stoking fear, stoking fire. She describes her followers to Homelander as soldiers, which is scary. But she tries to get into Homelander's good graces and says that her door is open for anything. anytime. And of course, she admonishes Homelander for caring about what other people think, which leads him to not only reject Doppelganger's version of Madeline, but then Doppelganger becomes a version of him when he's trying to love himself more. And what Doppelganger can't really anticipate is the amount of self-loathing Homelander has, because in the scene where he's confronting Doppelganger as him, you really get this feeling of Homelander confronting his own insecurities, which makes this scene more interesting than if they'd follow through with like the icky having sex with yourself situation. I like this take on Homelander because as awful as he is, grounding it in a deep, deep sense of insecurity humanizes him in a way that doesn't justify anything he does. It's still the worst. It still makes him the worst. It makes him understandable. And I think it's able to connect him to the villains in our world and the insecurities that fuel them. So of course he kills Doppelganger, who's pretending to be himself. And so in a way, he's kind of killing the part of himself that cares about what other people think, which is scary because that might have been the only thing that was holding him back. We'll see in future episodes. But now let's take a second to talk about Stormfront. As we learned last week, not only is she racist, because of course she is, the character she's based on in the comics are racist, and the name Stormfront comes from racist groups in our world, but it turns out she's been violently racist for a very long time. Now we get to the road trip with Mother's Milk, Huey, and Starlight. It's cool that Starlight is able to join the boys, or at least Huey and MM, even though the reasoning behind it is a little thin. It's cool to see that, of course, the dynamic she has with Huey kind of blossom and get physical. They consummate their relationship. Of course, she immediately ends it at the end of the episode, but before that, she gets a moment to bond with MM, and it's cool to see one of the other members of the boys actually get to spend time with Starlight. And we learn more about MM. We learn about his father, the lawyer, who had a crusade against Vought that ended up taking his life. It is implied that it was kind of the stress and the overworking. MM describes it as a disease, as opposed to like Vought silencing him. They just hire a team of lawyers that essentially work him to death. Starlight also picks up the fact that MM's OCD, which is an interesting point to be made. And I also like that Starlight's aware enough to point something out that even Huey, who's had significantly more time with MM, hasn't picked up on. So they are on a journey to go to an address to find out more about Liberty. This information passed on to MM from Butcher, from the Colonel, who's still feeling guilty about all the people that have died at the hands of Supes. And of course, this is unfinished business that was found in the files of Raynor, whose head exploded in the first episode. So instead of finding Liberty, they find Valerie, played by Dawn Lewis, who relays to them a story about her interactions with Liberty, who was a superhero in the 70s that Valerie ran into when she was a girl of 11. Her brother was driving the car, and Liberty just stops them and murders her brother, accusing him of a crime that he clearly didn't commit. And of course, it's gruesome because it's the boys. And what she reveals to them is that Liberty didn't vanish. Liberty's now Stormfront. So Stormfront has been around a while. And as you may remember, if you saw last week's review, which you haven't watched it, go check it out. Stormfront, the character in the comics, has been around since World War II, and he was a Nazi experiment. And of course, we know now the founder of Vought in the TV show universe was also a Nazi scientist. So perhaps this version of Stormfront has also been around since World War II, just tearing shit up since the 40s. And I like that the season is kind of coalescing around the idea of Stormfront being the big bad of the season. It gives us an easy target to overcome in this season, as opposed to somebody like Homelander, who we know is going to be endgame. He's going to be through the show till the end, and he's going to be like the final big bad probably. Although it looks like we're also setting up Butcher and Black Noir up for confrontation, which should be really cool. Oh, and finally, I got to mention everybody's favorite punching bag, the Deep. So it looks like the Church of the Collective is trying to get him a wife to rehabilitate his image so he can be a part of the Seven, and he gets to choose, except he doesn't. It's chosen for him, and the lady seems a little bit unhinged, which should be interesting. It's probably going to be an awful marriage for the Deep, because this show just loves to put the Deep through the ringer, and it's often pretty hilarious, so I don't blame him, and I'm into it. So overall, I really enjoyed this episode. It does feel a little bit less vital than the past 3 episodes. Not that it's like filler, but close. It slows down the forward momentum a little bit, which makes sense as we're kind of getting the middle stretch of the season. But there's a lot of characters sitting around speaking kind of bluntly about the way they feel, like with Frenchie and his ex, and Becca with Butcher, and Starlight when she rejects Huey, because of course they can't be happy together. Because again, it's only the 4th episode of the season. We got a lot of road to cover. But if I were to give it a rating out of the classic 10, I'd probably give it a straight up 8. Solid B. I think it was a solid episode. I think it sets up very interesting things for future episodes in the season. And I'm excited to see this Stormfront mystery get unpacked. And I'm excited to see where Homelander goes and how much more terrifying he can become. But let me know in the comments what you thought about this episode. What stuff stood out to you? Please like and subscribe. All that fun jazz. You can follow me at DJ Talks Trash. You can follow this show at Only Stupid Answers everywhere that matters. But you're going to want to take the vowels out of stupid on Twitter. Also, stay tuned for reviews for Lovecraft Country and new podcast episodes every Monday. See you next time.